Thank you. Thank you for wiggling with me. If you still need to wiggle, please do. We want everybody to move their bodies and get their needs met however they need to. So before I start, I'm going to let y'all know the pandemic is a blur, and there's a solid chance some of y'all have heard at least part of this sermon before. But I rewrote the ending, so it's like the new version. So every year in our congregations and at General Assembly, we celebrate our graduating high school seniors with a bridging ceremony. Today, we presented our Skylar with a cactus, but traditionally, we present our high school graduates with a rose with the thorns intact, which is different from our dedications where babies and children are presented with a rose that has the thorns removed. Removing those thorns represents that the community will shelter them while they are children and they learn to handle the thorny parts of life with care. So Skylar, we have symbolically said that you are ready today, but I wonder if perhaps we shouldn't be quite so quick to end our commitment to sheltering our young people. Surveys of Unitarian Universalist young adults show a significant drop in engagement after bridging. Anecdotal evidence and institutional memory tell us that these young adults will likely drift away and either come back when they have children themselves or not at all. I was in that former category. I joined the church when I was 17 years old as a senior in high school. I soon became very involved, especially with religious education. However, after a couple years, I just stopped coming. It was hard to make church a priority with my college classes. It was nearly impossible to get Sunday brunch shifts off from my serving job. And while I loved church and I missed going, it was very easy for me to slip away. In retrospect, I see how I was part of that larger pattern of young adults whose love for and connection to the church cannot sustain the demands of young adulthood without intentional and persistent intervention from the community. I wiggled too hard, guys. Like so many others, I came back to Unitarian Universalism, back to my home church in Tennessee when I had a child. And I will never forget the moment that I knew I was home. I hadn't been to church, Westside Unitarian Universalist Church in Knoxville, in 2 or 3 years. The minister and DRE and even the office administrator who had served when I first joined had moved on. And as I made my way towards the building, I was worried. I was worried I would be judged for coming back pregnant with no partner, worried I would be chastised for disappearing, or worse, that I would not be remembered at all. But I didn't have to worry for long. Before I even reached the entrance to the church, one of my former religious education students, Chloe, was flying down the steps and into my arms. That hug melted away every worry and left me without a doubt that I was finally exactly where I was meant to be. Like so many others, a desire to raise my child in an open, loving, intellectual, and compassionate community brought me back to church that day. But Chloe kept me there. She kept me there while I tentatively reacclimated to the community, slowly allowed myself to lean into their love, and cautiously learned to love myself through their example. I mean it when I say that hug saved my life and that Chloe changed my entire world for the better that day. So when I tell you that our children are our future, when I say that our youth are the ones who can and will save and change this world, I am speaking from experience, because I'm not sure any adult could have gotten me back through the doors that day. My faith that endured was not in adults or in the institution as she stands. It was in the brilliant kids I got to serve and in everything that we could be. My faith in Unitarian Universalism is still in the brilliant kids that I get to serve and in everything that we could be. The Reverend Dr. Natalie Fenimore said, "I am in love with a Unitarian Universalism that does not exist yet." Often we speak about the world we want in such terms, in terms of a bridge we will cross when we get to it, when the circumstances better allow it, when it is easier, whenever we get to point B, when we haven't even put on our shoes to depart from point A. There is never a good time for holy disruption of the status quo. There is never a good time for what is difficult and for change that is uncomfortable. So, what is to say that we are not now at the threshold of the world we dream about? When are we going to cross that bridge into the Unitarian Universalism we know we can embody? When are we going to take these beautiful, poetic principles and put them into real, direct action? And what is stopping us from now? In 2020, the Unitarian Universalist Association's first fully virtual General Assembly adopted 2 actions of immediate witness and 3 responsive resolutions. One resolution called for an increased investment in and accountability to our youth. This call came after the youth and young adult volunteer staff for GA withdrew their participation in the event due to their labor being undervalued and unfairly compensated. All but one of the other resolutions adopted revolved around fighting racism and white supremacy culture in our congregations and society. And we cannot pretend those 2 causes are not intertwined. A key characteristic of white supremacy culture is a clear hierarchy of power, a hierarchy that consistently puts white, able-bodied, cisgender, heterosexual adult males at the top. That is not a condemnation of any one person who embodies those identities. That is a commentary on the system of privilege and power that we all exist within. These people are the standard and everyone else the deviation. Standard medical care is designed for those bodies. Safety equipment is designed for those forms. Systems of power are designed for the success of those people, and the further away from the standard one exists, the more difficulty and oppression they will face. The young hold less power than the old, the feminine less than the masculine, the white more than the black or brown, and the impacts of holding multiple non-standard identities only compound. That compounding effect is called intersectionality, a term coined by Kimberly Williams Crenshaw to describe the unique experience of Black women who exist in intersecting oppressions for being Black and female. The implications of holding multiple marginalized identities cannot be extracted from one another. The systems which perpetuate those oppressions can only be dismantled. Likewise, the way we as a society and a faith tradition undervalue our children and youth, and the ways we undervalue our Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color cannot be detangled. And our Black and Indigenous youth and our youth of color, what must their experiences be? Do you think it is representative of our values? I had the honor of joining our youth this past Friday for a bonfire in our memorial garden. We made s'mores and checked in about our weeks. And as the evening went on, we had some really important conversations, which they have agreed to let me share with you, because the first rule of youth group is you don't talk about what happens in youth group. But they've agreed to let me share some of this with you today because it's important. This particular conversation stemmed from a discussion about a celebrity who has a reputation for drama and materialism, among other things. While speaking about this person, one of our kids said, "What if they showed up at church on Sunday?" And imagine that. Imagine, like, I'm not going to tell you who the celebrity is because your imaginations are more fun. Imagine a celebrity that you would be like, why would they want to come here? And I responded to them, well, what would be the you way to approach that situation? The following conversation touched on accountability, covenant, and shared values. The kids agreed that if this celebrity were to show up at UUCT, if they were willing to be held accountable for their behavior, if they were willing to abide by our covenant of right relations, we would gladly welcome them into the community. Andre and I then asked our youth group members if they thought our community was currently living up to those same standards of accountability and leaning into our values and covenants. Their answers were no, sometimes, and it's so performative. Now, these are mostly kids who have been raised UU in this community. Our kids said that we tend to spend too much time talking about things and not enough time doing things, that we may look and seem very nice and progressive on the surface, but it's obvious to them that we still have a lot of work to do. They said, perhaps we are all very nice, but need to work on being kind. And I agree with them. Our principles are aspirational. If we didn't still have work to do, we would not need them. We all know that respecting the inherent worth and dignity of all people should be the default. We have to say it because it isn't the default. We all know we should disrupt systems of oppression, that we should embody anti-racism in every way that we can. We have to say it because we know that that is not the case. Even within our own community, even among this community of people who are trying. And that can be okay. It can be okay as long as we are willing to admit the uncomfortable truth that we have not arrived yet. We are still striving. We are not perfect. We have not achieved wokeness. We have not achieved anti-racism. We have not achieved beloved community. We have barely scratched the surface. Does anyone struggle with perfectionism? Yeah, I see lots of hands. I know that I do. I often catch myself in the thought trap of, if I can't do it perfectly, it's not even worth trying. And I have to work to interrupt that pattern within myself every single day. But the thing is, we deserve to do things imperfectly. We deserve to try and fail and recover, with as much grace we can give one another, because all of us have failed and all of us will fail again. We get to choose to continue striving to be the people we want to be and build the world we dream about. And that is not always easy. It is often uncomfortable, often feels too personal, too vulnerable, too difficult, especially when we know that we will fail. But y'all, we have already failed. We are going to do it again. No amount of discussion, and discourse and policy and procedure can prevent us from failing. No amount of perfectionism can prevent us from being hurt. And that's what perfectionism is, isn't it? Striving to manage everything so well and so thoroughly and so perfectly that nothing can go wrong and no one can be hurt. I think at the core of that is such a beautiful want for all of us to just be okay and not be hurt. But we strive to manage everything so thoroughly that to avoid that discomfort and pain of being hurt ourselves, of knowing we've hurt another. But we cannot avoid those things, and we will always do more harm by trying to. Traditionally, bridging seniors cross a bridge at the front of the sanctuary, symbolically crossing from childhood into adulthood in their church community. They are embraced on the adult side with hugs and gifts from their now peers who have served as mentors, RE teachers, and trusted role models for years. And then traditionally, as a community and a faith tradition, we let them down. They graduate from church and the world keeps turning. Campus ministries are few and far between. Barriers of time and resources keep these kids from participating in church offerings. They slowly fade away, and the next year we have another bridging. Perhaps a few years after that, they bring their new babies to church. We welcome them and shower them with dedications and affirmations, loving them right through the children's recessional until they are back in RE, out of sight and out of mind. And the world keeps turning, still with the majority of time and resources focused on those of us society deems more worthy, those of us with adult attention spans and wallets and interests and point of view. Those respectable adults, I suspect many of us swore we would never be. But here we are at this bridge, this choice point, this opportunity to give our kids better than we received. We all come to this community with diverse experiences, perspectives, needs, and feelings. So many of us have had to disconnect from our feelings in order to survive this society, in order to survive under capitalism, sexism, white supremacy culture, and a world that tells us that to feel is to be weak, and to be weak is to be vulnerable, and that is the thing we should never be. But to feel is not to be weak, and to be vulnerable is not a bad thing. That is where our power lies. To feel is to be human, and so is to connect. In this interdependent community and world, connection is the bridge that makes everything else possible. It is easier sometimes not to connect, not to get too invested, not to see the person behind the email address. It is easier to be cautious instead of being vulnerable. But when we do that, we rob ourselves of the opportunity to lean deeper into our values, to explore the uncomfortable parts of growth, and to work through them together. Y'all, we can do hard things, but we cannot do them alone, and we cannot do them without connection. I'll leave you with a quote that I've used a lot lately from Theodore Roosevelt. This quote is also frequently referenced in Brené Brown's work, which I've been studying, and centers around shame and vulnerability. I encourage everyone to explore it, and you will have an opportunity here soon. We will be doing a workshop working through Brené Brown's Dare to Lead. And it has a lot of these skills for rumbling with vulnerability and leaning into discomfort that I think we all will benefit from. This quote is often called the man in the arena quote, but I have tweaked it here just slightly for inclusivity. It is not the critic who counts, not the one who points out how the strong one stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the one who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, great devotions, who spends themselves in a worthy cause, who at best, in the end, knows the triumph of high achievement, and who at worst, if they fail, at least fail while daring greatly, so that their place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. The only way we are going to get anywhere is together. May we have the courage to meet one another where we are, stay curious about our feelings, lean into our values, and dare greatly in this arena, wholly and authentically and imperfectly together. May it be so, and blessed be.